One. Welcome to the first episode of whatever the hell I'm going to call this podcast. I'm with my two guests, Carter Crooked. and I'm with Mr. Jarvis.
Yep, that's me.
Thanks for actually saying something. Alright, we're going to be talking about history and genres of punk. Now, punk for the longest time has always been politics. Politics, feelings, shit like that. Now, it first started with the Ramones back in 1974, but they're most known for being the first punk bands commonly, but it was actually death in 1971.
I object. Now, if we scroll back the timeline, we end up 1965 in Peru in some dude's smelly garage with Los Psychos. Their first single, a double-sided track of Demolition and Come On, was actually considered by many aficionados and experts such as myself and not like Taylor to be the first punk band from Peru, and not New York or Britain or even, well, anywhere else people think of when we say punk, but Peru.
Well,
and that's my argument.
That's very interesting.
Did they start off with politics and all that? Like, what kind of things did they sing about?
Well, if you listen to half their songs, Demolition was, forgive me, I'm not Peruvian, so I don't really understand it that much, but it's very angry. It is a DIY ethic, and they actually follow more of old country songs in the vein of like Marty Robbins, where there's a song about fugitive from Alcatraz. There's a song, there's love songs, there's all that, but all of them have a very angry undertone and are all very. I wouldn't say they have bad production, but they have very punk production.
Very DIY.
Yeah. And Demolition was pretty much a bunch of angry Peruvian teenagers. That's what it's.
It can't get more punk than that. It really can't.
That is the essence of punk.
Greasy Peruvian teenagers.
Now that we know the start of it, it goes into we can go more into like the creation, like the defining of it, which happened more with Black Flag and Dead Kennedys, and I would say the Sex Pistols.
Well, the Sex Pistols, for me at least, from what I've read and what I've understood, were much bigger influences on a lot of hardcore bands like Black Flag, Dead Kennedys, even the Descendants. Because Sex Pistols invented, in a way, punk fashion. The Ramones stole it from the Greasers of the 60s. Leather jackets, tight jeans, skater shoes, and the long hair that looked really dumb, but we all pretend it doesn't. Sex Pistols invented the fashion. Technically, it was actually Richard Hell.
Can I say something
they kind
here?
of stole it. Yeah,
go ahead.
The Sex Pistols, they may have invented punk fashion. They did wear swastikas, sort of.
Why?
That was a trend. We forget about with the punk scene.
Yeah, we can forget about that.
That aged horribly.
Punk
they're not Nazis.
Aged horribly.
It did age horribly. No.
They don't do it anymore.
Okay, shut up. It aged horribly. Don't defend it.
Like pogo dancing. It's like pogo dancing. We don't talk about it.
I'm saying it's just sort of suspicious.
We don't talk about it.
Punk is not about Nazis, okay?
But a lot of punks are Nazis. Not all of them, but like there's a good minority of punks who are Nazis.
I'd say more it's the majority that aren't Nazis, and it's the Nazi punks that really taken over, and that showed more like people.
I think the reason why was because it was rebellious music for suburban kids. Think about Los Angeles punk at the start. It was rebellious music for suburban kids.
And what's more rebellious than Nazism?
Well,
that did not sound right.
It kind of caught me off guard.
Okay, let's just change the subject.
I mean, let me explain myself.
But a lot of punks felt like that was the ultimate way to rebel, because they wanted to blame someone in society, and if they're rich white kids, they can't blame the cops. They blame, they blame
minorities.
Colored people.
Or they could blame the rich like any self-respecting communist.
Exactly. Or their parents, like every teenager ever.
Well, what a lot of punk is now is borderline criticization of government, everything else in the world that's like it's sung about. Like it's divided into three things that's sung about in punk.
Now?
Still now.
I think it's more fart jokes. Thanks, Blink-182.
But it's
It
more.
depends where you look, because I can show you a bunch of punk that's still really political.
Yeah, but...
I can't guarantee it'll be good, but it'll be political.
Yeah, but like it's more divided into three things: political, about like, and then depression, and about like the singer himself, and then just fun, and
Setting
it's
people on fire.
Blowing up embassies.
wait. Let's go to a different.
Lesbians.
Let's talk about more of like the big like bang for punk, like out in DC in the CBGB
Okay,
club.
well...
Those
I
are
think
two
we-
different scenes.
Can
DC
you-
and CBGBs.
Can you tell the difference?
Yes, I can tell you a lot about DC punk. It started off in the 80s as the new hardcore wave was in Washington, D.C., with Ian MacKaye leading the front with his band, Minor Threat. And then in the summer of 1986, a lot of those hardcore punk bands started transitioning to a more emotional sound called early emo. What are you doing to me?
Talk
Richard
about
Carter?
Rites of Spring!
Rites of Spring, yes. Rites of Spring in 1986 was a project by Ian MacKaye, which really started emo music as a whole, which at then was just emotional hardcore punk, where the singers could express their own feelings about society and their depression, which was a stark contrast to
Ian
the more...
MacKaye was a beautiful producer.
He was.
He literally found Rites of Spring in the gutter.
Wait, I thought he was in Rites of Spring.
He wasn't in Rites of Spring. He produced Rites of Spring.
I got that mixed up. I
Yeah.
apologize.
Because the lead singer of Rites of Spring was in Fugazi. I completely forget his name.
Everyone does.
But he has a very distinct voice, and he pretty much found this band in the gutter and said, "Hey, I like what you guys are doing. Come on down. Come on down." And then recorded one album with them. And later recruited him to be in one of the only actual punk bands of the 90s, Fugazi, or post-punk.
I feel like we're ignoring the crust punk and ska punk in the 90s.
I feel like we're
get to
ignoring
that.
the entire New York scene, which I'm about to explain, young man.
Owen, we'll get to the crust punk out. For now, staying on topic for DC. There's a,
He wants to talk about Bad Brains.
of course, I want to talk about Bad Brains. Bad Brains. They made a song called "Banned in DC" where they got supposedly banned. They went into a club, and they went in, and the club owner didn't want punks, and especially not black punks. You know, they wrote a song about it. And I'm gonna play it.
A little golf clap for you.
Now, that band was led by HR and Dr. No, and they sadly, like later on, they went into different ways. HR wanted to go more into the reggae since they did reggae while they were black, but Dr. No wanted to go more into rock and the more. Yes, he did.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
Good. Well, that's that, and then we can go. Now we can go into more of the other genres. You talked about crust punk.
Yes, so crust punk was an interesting genre of punk that started in the 80s, and it took from the D-beat of Sweden and the anarcho-punk of just Europe as a whole. It created this combination that was loud, it was fast, it had screaming vocals, it had really smelly singers. There's been nobody showered in that genre.
They're all poor.
Yeah, exactly. So it was started in the 80s in the UK, and they sang about like capitalism and the politicians, and just how being poor sucks because they were all poor. And it just branched off into this big thing, like numerous genres. They helped spawn grindcore, helped spawn stenchcore. It wasn't a big thing. It never got mainstream, but there's still a decent crust community in various countries nowadays, especially in South America. You want me to talk more about South American crust?
I want you to
No,
wrap it
I
up.
said wrap it up.
Wrap it up!
Okay, now you picked out a song by Discharge called "Protest and Survive." Can you say a little like what that's about before I play it?
It's about protesting and surviving.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, it's one of the first crust punk.
Yeah, it's like one of the first crust punk bands from the 80s.
And they
in
also
UK.
innovated in hardcore and crossover.
Hardcore was also a big influence on crust.
That's very interesting, Mr. Crooked. I'm gonna play it.
So, can I say something real quick?
Sure.
So that was like very early crust punk before the distinctive screech came into play, which you can see later on in bands like Feed and Deconstruct from Germany. Anyways, continue on hardcore, Mr. Crooked.
So, as the 70s ended and the 80s were approaching, punk began to take a new direction. They were sick of sounding like all the other garage bands, Stooges, MC5, the Sonics, to the mid-70s. Because that was a sound a lot of them were influenced by heavily. You know, as in Ramones, you know, the Clash took different sounds, integrating some punk, some jazz, some reggae. But they wanted a little bit of harder, you know, a little bit of force behind their music. And what better to add force than Heroin in Los Angeles? Boom! 1979! The Germs release GI, Germs Incognito, which was actually the name they used to write their band name in for shows because all the clubs banned them. Because Darby Crash would get so messed up on heroin that he would just start screaming. And no one could hear what he said. They'd start drawing things with him on him with Sharpies, you know. He'd go a little crazy. And by the end of the night, they made about $20. He was permanently scarred, and then he died. But that started hardcore, baby.
Another band. Another band from the 80s is Husker Du. They dabble into a lot of different things. Like they're punk, but there's also a little bit of country in it. There's also a lot of hardcore actually, and like just slow songs. It could be slow, it could be fast, it could be metal. Now, if you're interested in that, you just go see it on Spotify. All the songs that we've played. I know. They're like my favorite, man.
Quit jacking them off, bro.
Shut up. I'm just gonna play a little sample of it.
Very good song. Thank you,
I
Mr.
know,
Taylor.
right? I know. It's like the best. That's even an underrated one too. Like it's not as popular.
It is. Charted Trips is insanely underrated.
I haven't even heard of it before, but then again, I don't listen to too
Shame
much
on
Husker
you.
Du.
Shame,
I know.
shame.
I am a shame
Now,
to my family.
We're a little slip for time, so now we need to get into more of
Lightning round.
All right. We got
Everyone goes person per person. Talon, we're doing it clockwise. Just list some vague genre of punk, just to show the audience how diverse the genre can be. Taylor.
horror punk.
Hey, give us an example, my man.
We got the Misfits, the only band that anyone can ever think of
October
that does horror
19th,
punks.
2019. Oh,
Ska punk, big in the 90s, super happy, like a lot of up-picked guitars, a lot of brass, a lot of horns, depressing lyrics about suicide and just
Drug dealing,
how
Give
shitty
us some
life
examples.
is. A real big fish. She has a girlfriend now. Guy girlfriend breaks up with him because she's transgender or whatever.
What about the biggest ska punk band of the
Oh my
90s?
god. You have 10 seconds left.
More. Biggest ska punk band of the 90s.
Operation Ivy?
No, they were 80s.
I would like to thank all the people who came out to help me with this.